You've spent the last 10 years studying owls and paranormal phenomenon surrounding owls.
A little more like 15 years, but somewhere
It's been
in there,
15
yeah.
years.
Well, 2006 was really when I started studying it. I got really active around 2009.
Why owls, Mike?
Okay, so that's the premise of, that's the mystery, basically. Why owls? In the mythology of owls, like the old folklore, the ancient mythology, the wives' tales, the owls seem to. So for ancient man, owls could see into the night, and they, I mean, obviously, ancient man would have seen that, would have recognized that, and the mythologies have built up around that. And not only does the owl see into the night and fly in the darkness, the core of the mythologies would be that the owl would fly into the darkness and then return with a message. And that's really consistent across the world's mythologies. So if we update that to present day, the owl in the mythology can travel to other realms, can travel to other dimensions, can travel to the land of the dead, can travel to the land of the gods, can pass that veil and return with a message. Presently, in my research, I'm finding that parallels much of what I'm finding. So the ancient mythology is showing up present day in real life events. Now, if we turn the clock back, 400 years and we're sitting in a village somewhere in South Dakota, and I had a powerful owl experience, a powerful mystical owl experience. I had an experience with an owl where it felt highly charged, it felt important. I would have had an outlet. I would have been able to go to the shaman at the edge of the village and sit in his teepee and talk about or address the mystery of the owl, and the culture would have had some way to grasp that. We don't live in that world anymore. Like, our culture has a tough time grasping the fact that owls have a rich mythic tradition, and that it is playing out in real time right now. And so if someone has a real experience with an owl, they're about 2 mouse clicks away from finding me. If you type UFOs owls, you're going to find me. And so I have been getting these stories, a lot of them, like once a day. I get a really good A+ story. And so your question was, why owls? This is a long answer, but the owls seem to impart and seem to hold and seem to have a resonance that punctuates or that colors these paranormal experiences. Now, the core of my study has been UFO stuff, but it certainly goes all over the map. It goes to death, it goes to meditation, it goes to psychedelic drugs, it goes to shamanic initiations. These are all well understood in the folklore that owls play a role. So that they show up in connection with UFOs is really interesting to me, because that overlaps these other things: death, shamanic initiation, and like a psychedelic trip, and also meditation. I think I said that, yeah. So your question, why owls? I wish I had a good, simple answer. I don't, because I'm still struggling with what it may or may not mean.
So how did this whole thing start for you? When did you have your first owl experience, and what made you become so fascinated by owls? So
in 2006, I went camping with a woman named Kristen, and I was living at the time right next to Grand Teton National Park, and I was working for an outdoor school, and she worked for the school too, and I had been away all summer. And now this seems really funny, and the culture in that town, in that part of the world, right next to a national park, like taking someone camping for a first date is pretty normal. So I kind of said, oh, you must have camped a lot this summer. You've been here all summer. It was August. Excuse me, it was October when I asked her. And she said, no, I haven't camped at all. I'm like, that's terrible. Let's go out camping. Let's go out for one night. And she said, yes. So we went out for one night, and we sat under the stars. And we didn't take a tent with us. We knew there was going to be the weather was going to be nice, so we didn't bother taking a tent. So her and I sat as the sun was setting, and I was making dinner on a little camp stove, and the conversation got really deep, like surprisingly deep. And I remember this is a total stranger, and I'm looking at her and I'm thinking, like, I didn't expect this depth to this person, this spiritual depth to her. And at that moment, an owl flew over us, and then another owl, and then a third owl. So there were 3 owls flying around us as the sun was setting, and we eventually laid our sleeping bags down under the stars, and the owls would still fly over us. They would fly right over our faces, and they would blot out the stars for just 1 second. It was so mystical. And after that camping trip, I said, let's go camping again. And she said, okay. And so 4 days later, we went out for one night again, and this time in another part of the mountains. And it was colder that night, and so and we had a tent set up. It looked like it might rain. It actually snowed that night, and we said let's walk up to that hill before the sun goes down, because we can watch the sunset, and it'll give us a chance to warm up so we can climb into the tent a little warmer. So we hiked to the top of the hill, and at the top of the hill, as the sun is setting, 3 owls land near us, fly around us. And now it happened 4 days earlier, and they were kind of off in the distance, and they would kind of swoop above us. But this time they were on the branch right next to us, and one of these owls landed right at our feet. And I just remember looking at her, and she had this wide-eyed expression of just like total astonishment. And now what I didn't say at the time, because it was too weird, and I'm saying it now, I've sort of crossed the line, I've like totally abandoned myself to this. What I heard a voice in my head both the first time and the next night. I heard a voice in my head looking at these real owls that said, this has something to do with the UFOs. And after those experiences, like I kind of felt like I had permission to ask people, hey, have you ever had any odd experiences with owls? And I had a little blog. I started the blog 3 years later in 2009. So when I started that blog, one of the questions I put right out there and talked about and wrote about was, like, hey, has anyone had any odd experiences with owls? I want to hear your stories. And what happened is I got flooded with these stories. And so I've been archiving, cataloging, trying to make sense of these stories, and it has turned into a full-time job. So it's been rewarding in all ways except financially. It's been so but it has been remarkably rewarding to take on this research. Now, just one thing. So when on the first couple of days of the blog, I put the story up with Kristen. That was her name, the woman that I took camping, and I got back to her after I had published the story on the blog, or posted the story on the blog, and I got back to her and I said, what were we talking about? I remember we were talking about something the very first night that we saw the first owls. You were talking about something. She said, oh, I remember exactly what I was talking about. She said, I was trying to describe my deepest, most heartfelt definition of what God means to me. So, like, that takes an already mystical story and really pumps it up into almost the transcendent. So for me, those are the kinds of ethereal clues I'm looking for. Like, I'm not a nuts and bolts UFO researcher. Like, I have actually gone to sites and measured the burn marks in a yard. I've done that kind of thing. But the real stuff, the real meat of it to me, is this elusive, mystical stuff that seems to be intertwined with the totality of the phenomenon.